There's Shannon. Hello, hello, Barnes & Noble Book Club. It is really great to see everyone. Well, virtually. This is how we do things. I'm here with Shannon DeVito. I'm Miwa Messer, the producer and host of Barnes & Noble's podcast, Poured Over, and Adrienne Brodeur, the woman of the hour, who has written our July BNN Book Club pick, Little Monsters. And I know, because I have all of your questions, that we are all dying to know many, many of the same things. So just to let you know, I'm going to work your questions through as we go. I do not hold them to the end. If you have additional questions you'd like to add, you can use the QA module at the bottom of your screen, or you can drop them in the chat. I will be looking for them throughout the event while we have our groovy conversation. But before we really get started, remember, there are spoilers in this conversation. Adrienne and I are actually dying to have part of the conversation we couldn't have when she was a guest on Poured Over. And Shannon, I'm going to ask you, because I know the answer, why we chose Little Monsters for book club.
The sense of place in this book alone made me fall in love with it. But honestly, the siblings, the secrets, the propulsive nature into what is going to be explosive at the end, character building, Adam and his non-PC world that he's in, I really think every single layer of every character was ripe for discussion, which is honestly exactly what you want out of a book club pick. It's different perspectives, different angles. Everyone's going to be drawn to something specific about the book. So we had to do it, especially for summer. It felt like pitch perfect for the time.
And Adrienne, you've been traveling all over the country promoting. I mean, certainly you've spent a lot of time down the Cape and everything else, but you've also I've seen photos of you everywhere. It's been great to see.
I have been on a fun road trip far and wide, south, the West Coast, and I've been walking into Barnes and Nobles all over the country, which has also been thrilling.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. But also part of the reason I raised that is that it's not limited to the Cape, right? This family, right? It is all about this family. But listen, before we really dive in, lots of people had two questions that I'm going to ask you first. They're asking about the title. Where did Little Monsters come from? And also how this book started for you, because you're covering a lot of ground. And I sort of feel like if we start there, then we can bring in the characters themselves.
So I'd love to start with how this book came to be, because I was actually on book tour with Wild Game. And that book came out in 2019. And so I had a nice long runway before what we all know happened in March of 2020. And I got sent home. And obviously I live in Cambridge and I have this home on Cape Cod. And I thought I was taking my kids and family to Cape Cod for an extra long spring break. And we ended up being here for 7 months. And so during that time was when I first started thinking about the concept for my next book. And the biggest thing I was doing was walking the beaches. I mean, I probably took a 6-mile walk almost every day, all of it. And so the things, the creative process, I think, is hugely different for everyone. But for me, I have this way of really starting to notice what I notice, starting to notice where my mind lands. And in the words of the late, great Mary Oliver, who's a Cape Cod poet, she has this beautiful poem, "Pay attention, be astonished, write about it." And that is really what I did. So the first things that came to me were place. So I love what you said about place, Shannon. After place came time and then situation. So the place I knew all the whole time was going to be the Cape. And when people have asked me, well, you had a memoir set on the Cape. What people who don't necessarily live here or know about the Cape is that every town is so different from every other town. Provincetown is as different from Chatham as Las Vegas is from Boston. These are other worlds. There are parts of the Cape that are like a sandbar. There are parts that are precious little towns. It's a really varied place. The time I always knew I wanted to set a book before the election in 2016. And that, I think I was even in real time in 2016, I remember just sensing the uneasiness of the mood of the country, the collective anxiety that we were all feeling. You could feel it in some men as they were preparing possibly for a female president, which they did or didn't relish the idea of you felt it in women as well. The tone and tenor of the election was unlike anything we'd seen before. And while this is in no way a political book, I wanted to evoke that sense and the little microaggressions that were happening, particularly around women relating to Hillary and hearing her called shrillery and all those things that I found really interesting that were going on. And then we get to the situation. And the situation that my brain kept alighting on was siblings and why it is such a complicated relationship. Not always. I mean, some siblings, my husband's family, all loving butterflies and unicorns. But for a lot of us, it's a complicated relationship. And much the way, I'm curious about how two people technically growing up in the exact same environment with the exact same people can have such different experiences. So from there, the first thing I did was sort of look to the original sibling tale, which is Cain and Abel. And I got a whole lot of nothing there because that's like, a half a sentence long. Gave God gifts. He preferred Abel's. Cain was pissed and murdered Abel. And you're just like, wait, what happened to motivation? What happened? Like I had been looking for so much, but from that story, I actually unwittingly captured the structure of the book, which is towards the gift giving to the father, which of course always reveals much more about the givers. And, arguably those gifts it's so weird to know that I can actually say what things are in this.
Yes. Yeah, I know. All of it. We can talk about the painting. We can talk about the real estate deals. We can talk about everything.
But that they're very revealing gifts. And so is also part of it. So then in terms of Little Monsters, the truth is that was a working title, and it was in part, it was drawn from the fact that was the patriarch, Adam Gardner, what he, his little pet name for his kids. But as I kept writing and thinking about all these things, I mean, Little Monsters to me represents not only the monsters in the ocean. Adam is a cetologist and a marine biologist who's studying whales. And they're all sorts of secret monsters, but it was really also about the microaggressions, the little monsters that were going on in the political and social landscape at the time. And but the funny thing about the title was when I sold the book, originally my publishing house was like, that's lovely, but no, that will not be the title. And so for about a year.
Oh, I love the title.
As I was writing the book, I mean, as you can only imagine, was coming up or trying to come up with every different possible name, whale metaphor,
no whale metaphors. I'm so glad we have the title we have.
But in the end, when my editor showed me, and very early on, I was on a Zoom with her and, the cover popped up. I was like, that is beautiful. But also, what is that old title that you guys don't like doing on there? And she's like, it just seems perfect now. So we went with it.
I'm very happy that's how it turned out, because whale metaphors, as much as I respect whales, and we will talk about Adam. No, thank you. No, thank you. Little Monsters is perfect. When I think of monsters, I think of us. I think of people. We are not always good to each other, and especially of late, it seems like, and it's just perfect. To me, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect, especially for this family, because I love the way this book opens. I love grumpy old weird Adam making his bad decisions. The opening of this book is pitch perfect. And if I remember correctly, you told me when you and I first spoke that Adam was sort of the easiest character for you to write. The 70-year-old guy? What?
The 70-year-old sexist, not
bipolar.
All of it.
Bipolar. He just spoke to me. He was so distinct and so honestly so entertaining to write, because he's just smart and funny and curious. And like a lot of old men, they're cranky, but somehow impossibly lovable. And that is what I found with Adam. I was just like, he didn't just say that. Oh, but he did. and you still kind of.
He's a product of his time. He really, I'm not actually making excuses for him, but we've all met people like this where you're just like, oh, you're not going to learn. No, there is no evolution here. This is straight up,
And he has to be likable enough for his kids to want to please him all the time, despite all of his challenges and obstacles that he's really put them through. Like one thing, lighting a match and then surprised that there's a wildfire behind him, where it very much is like their desire and need to still please him, even though they don't like him all the time, is one of the driving things for me when I was reading through it.
He's very charismatic, obviously, but he also does adore them in his own way. And I think the other thing that's just true about, I will say, those of us who've had very complicated parents, which I consider myself one of, you only get one childhood. It is all you know. So you don't know that there are these sort of docile, tender, sweet, putting you first kind of parents out there. So it's sort of what you know, and you're competing for attention in your own way and in their language, probably, which is certainly what Ken and Abby are trying to do.
And also brilliant older people. And I mean, Adam, he's a brilliant scientist. Yes. He's just not great at the people piece. He's really not good at, he's the kind of guy who really does have trouble making ice. Like he kind of needs to be married and kind of needs to have someone taking care of him. And like, he can do the whale thing and he can do the science thing, but wow, the rest of it is.
Well, and just to your point about being a man of his time, just sort of, and plus mixed in with that is his grandiosity due to the mania. But when he's seeing Betty the barista and just assuming he is on fire with her when she's sort of barely doing his overtures and everything else. But that is a guy that we all know.
Yeah. And also we have an anonymous question. You do a terrific job portraying mental illness from a balanced and sympathetic perspective. What sort of research did you do to accomplish this? Because Adam is certainly not the first character in literature or real life to have decided to go off his meds because he thinks he has a better answer. And, he could have been a caricature, and you made sure that none of your characters were caricatures.
Well, thank you.
But let's start with him.
I did a lot of research. I have several friends who are therapists and psychiatrists, and they gave me a lot of books to read and case studies. I also have my fair share of mental illness in my family. I had a really formative event as a young woman when I was in my late 20s, and I had just moved back to New York City, when the younger sister of a dear friend of mine showed up on my doorstep. And I'd known of her, but I didn't know her.
Right.
And for all description, she was just the really simple, sweet woman. She was a nursery school teacher, lived in a small town, blah, blah, blah. But when she arrived on my doorstep, and I was in this unusual position of being able to take her in for a few days, and we spent this very intensive period when she was clearly in a manic episode. She was a rapid cycler. So, and it was her first episode. So she was absolutely mentally on fire. She was making connections. She could quote Shakespeare. She could talk about black holes. She was she was aware enough of what was going on that she was mystified. She's like, watch me, look at, think of this. And she was so devastated when it all left within 24 hours. And I remember just feeling like, wow, to have that. Yeah, like no wonder people want to go off their meds, to have that feeling of, I know everything. I can pull all this out of my hat. I can talk about this. And obviously it hits people in different ways. And I truly believe, this is not an expert opinion on mental illness. And clearly some people have real issues. But I also think, there's a spectrum on which we're all odd. We're all self-medicating with our glass of wine. We all have moments of being extremely self-centered and thinking we're brilliant and thinking we're idiots and going back and forth. I think it's called being human, and people obviously are on extremes of that. And Adam is high functioning, but further out than most of us. And then there are people who are clearly much more ill than he is.
Shannon, what was it like for you reading about this 70-year-old? basically your grandpa's age. So let's talk about the generational piece though, from your point of view. And also Sharon Statler, who joined late, you'll be able to see this on the Barnes and Noble YouTube channel after the fact. So anyone else who joins late, that's always the answer. You can always find the book club after the fact on our YouTube.
Yes, or if you haven't finished the book and you want to avoid spoilers, because we are going to talk to the end, you can go back and watch the recording later. It is, I think, because Adam encompassed so many parts of people that I knew, I felt like I could relate to him just from knowing the people that I know. But it was the same, quite honestly, with all of the characters, Jenny through Abby, through Ken, through Steph. You know, it was all of them. I saw pieces and parts of people that I knew because the characters were so layered and dynamic. So it was, I liked that they had such specific voices within each point of view and that you could completely encompass who they were within each chapter. And it wasn't, as you said earlier, a caricature of what they could have been. Right. There was always a reason why they were behaving like this or thinking that way or going through that experience, and I think it's slowly peeling back the reasons why throughout the book is why the character development for me was so successful and why I feel like I knew all of them halfway through the book.
Well, and also for me, the stakes, I believed that they wanted to be connected as a family, right? Like sometimes you get into these family sagas and if you read as much as we do, sometimes it just doesn't, right? You just don't buy in. You absolutely don't buy in. And yet in this particular case, this particular family, like
you know why they're drawn to
all of it, right?
Yeah.
Right. And actually, Stephen Rogers has just brought up something that I was about to bring up, which is Frankenstein.
Yes.
And Mary Shelley. And I reread
Frankenstein too. Yeah.
Yeah. I reread actually the 1816 edition or whichever one you're supposed to. I reread that, Adrienne, before you and I sat down. But let's talk about Frankenstein for a second, because, you know, I think there's so many people who just automatically think, oh, right, it's the monster, but technically Frankenstein's the doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, I think, you know, in the same way that characters are all about the author on some level. I mean, I think people often think, you know, you're modeling characters on different people, you know, but in fact, you know, little pieces of you are in each of them. But I found Frankenstein related to each person in the book so well. And, you know, there was the metamorphosis for Abby, who's trying to pain, and also the fact that her mother died in childbirth, like the author's mother, and her fear of having children and you know, the fears that go back to her complicated relationship with her brother, of just all of that. But I love the metaphors of that book. And you know, it's honestly, there's so many books that I wanted to talk about in my book, and a point at which, unless you're writing a novel that's set in a bookstore, you've got to not do too much of that, I think.
All right. But here's the thing. I'm going to pull in Vivian Gornick's situation in the story for a second, because that's a book I love. That's a book that helped you actually get Wild Game out into the world. And Vivian has this line about the loneliness of the monster. And it's a line that I love. And I think it's a line that's important too, because the empathy piece, if you did not have the empathy for your characters that you do, this would have been a very different book. This would have, without a doubt, Adam is not the only metaphor for the Frankenstein, for any piece of Frankenstein, right? As it is, as you said, every single one of them has a piece of it. And I think if you remember too, how radical Frankenstein was at the time, if you think about how Mary Shelley was even looking at humanity, it kind of makes your eyes pop a little bit, because each of these characters, whether it's Steph, who we'll get to in a second, but certainly Ken and Abby and Adam, like their ideas of the world are really, really sharply challenged. And before we get to Abby, can we get to Ken? Can we get to Ken, the developer? Because I mean, I get it. Ken's world is changing. Ken has done a lot with his life. Ken was the fat kid that everyone made fun of. But I'm glad you gave Ken an arc, because there were moments where I was struggling with him, and I was willing to follow you because you're you, and I trust you as the writer. But Adrienne, there were some moments where I wanted to punt him into the sun.
And I felt that same way about him, but also to your point, I felt a great deal of empathy towards Ken. And it does circle back to that Vivian Gornick quote, which I wanted to use just as much for this book as I did for Wild Game. And so the whole quote is, in order for the drama to deepen, you must show the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent. And I remember thinking, I can't just use that same line that I bandied about so much with Wild Game about my mother for every character in this book. But essentially, I mean, at its core, I think, you know, I'm not interested. I mean, I said this to you before, I'm not interested in heroes and villains. I'm interested in like the good and bad in all of us, the gray in all of us. And so Ken is clearly the most wounded character in this book. So unlike his sister Abby, he actually had a mother that he lost. I mean, Abby's mother died within days of her birth. So she had a loss for sure, but she didn't know the mother in the same way. Whereas as Ken really felt that viscerally, he, you know, they both had a somewhat absent father. Ken was, I'm much more aware of the stepmothers that came and went. So he felt he was abandoned by woman after woman after woman. And then he loved his sister and he really wanted to smother her. I mean, she was his anchor and lifeline and everything else. And then at some point, you know, during puberty, when kids are separating and individuating and going their own way, Abby was like, yeah, I'm sort of done being smothered here. So then he was wounded again. And when I initially tried to interrogate why a brother might hate a sister this much, or what might have been at the source of this, I mean, it just seems so obvious that you'd only have such powerful negative feelings if you loved someone too. And so that was where he was born from, was this, you know, this guy who actually really does deserve our pity. I mean, he is the person you'd least want to be in the book, right?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, Shannon, you and I talked about this a little bit in the office when you picked Little Monsters and we were, you know, sort of noodling through. But can you just speak to the siblings' relationship and what it meant to you? Because I know it was, for those of us who have siblings, it's a big driver and it's a great point of view, but you had some really cool stuff to say.
It is a big driver. I think one of the things about Abby and Ken that drew me in so much is trying to figure out if they could grow together in a healthy way or not. And when it was time to cut out and say, this is unhealthy for both of us for different reasons. And I appreciate the background to Ken and why he is the way he is, but it also doesn't diminish Abby's experience with him or why she's fractured. And then, you know, I think the painting at the end is the perfect physical manifestation of what that relationship was. And then it is the women around her that sew her back together with gold, essentially. So it is choosing to, you know, surround herself with a family that can work for her, but she's still losing, I think, the closest relationship she had as a child that was her childhood. Was that. So it's a different type of grief that, you know, Ken may have already went through a lot of grief losing their mother. And now she has to do this at a fully different stage as she becomes a mother. So it's just, I think all of those layers spoke so much to what that relationship and how it affected them so deeply, because they were so close. They were so close in age. They had the same experiences. And as we've talked about, came out very, very differently. So it is, you know, it's just a lot to think about. And anyone who has siblings, or even, you know, if you grow up close with someone a similar age, and it's, you can see pieces and parts of a lot of the conversations they had and how they act with each other and how tension can slowly grow. I think it's relatable, and parts of it are relatable.
And that was also what was so interesting about writing a very close third person. I really wanted to dig into this family and to show the deeper truth inside them and do it compassionately. But, you know, we all think we know what the next person is thinking or why they're behaving the same way. And it was so wonderful to enable the reader to see more than each of these characters who are sort of stumbling, where they're stuck in this wounded part of their past. And of course, we all know that, until you really face those things, you remain quite stuck.
And part of it for me, though, is the way,
Yeah.
but part of it is the way you use the siblings to talk about class and privilege.
Yes. Yes.
And the things, I mean, there are times, and I think any human being has experienced this, where you're with a person who might be incredibly difficult or unpleasant, or, pick the phrase you want to use to describe them. And it's because they're afraid or they're anxious and they have no language for what they're experiencing. So they get really unpleasant, let's put it that way. And we see a lot of that. And not just, Abby has her moments. I do love her, but Ken certainly is the embodiment of that. This is a guy who's actually actively afraid of being found out.
Yeah,
he's that insecure. And the idea that there are people, sort of doing that little strut through the world who are that kind of busted. He's busted. He's really busted.
No, and he's put up such a shiny facade about his life, and that's what his money has enabled him to do, is seem bulletproof and impenetrable. But of course, he's absolutely the opposite.
And he's got this plan, right? Money is going to fix all of the things that went wrong previously. And it's like, well, actually,
I think
you really actually think your dad is going to be excited that you're building him an old age home and naming it for him. That doesn't quite. And I love those moments for each and every character has it. Yeah. Thinking, oh, I know exactly what's happening here. I know exactly. And it's just like, okay, I'm going to stand here on the sidelines.
That was Ken's gift for his father, was, his father lives in this sort of inappropriate house to grow very old in, that's far from, grocery stores and rickety and everything else. So he thinks he's going to wow his dad by giving him just the slickest of all slicked out condos with the great,
and he doesn't want
appliances and so on. And on the flip side, Abby is giving him a work of art that's just so revealing about her childhood. And I loved when actually Steph sort of pointed out, like, the most personal gift I've given my father is Old Spice. It's just such a different idea. And so both of them are odd gifts in different ways.
Right. But the idea too, that they're both Adam's legacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Both Ken and Abby are Adam's legacy. And Adam's thinking the whales are my legacy.
Yeah.
My work is my legacy. My house and my community are my legacy. And actually, he's got 2 really busted kids.
Yeah.
That's his actual legacy. And the question is, who ends up making a little more progress? And I think for someone, there is a little bit of vanity to Adam in that old man way, where he's just well, of course, my reputation precedes me, and and you're just like, please don't let me be the one who's stuck next to you at the buffet at Thanksgiving, because I can only give you so much before my eyes start to cross. And we've all been in that situation. It's like the barista going, oat milk or cow milk, and making that face. We've all sort of done it. But the layers here, and part of those layers, you know where I'm going with this. Ken's wife, Jenny.
I love that you love Jenny.
I just, the cutting up the fret sheets and just being who she was, and then ultimately becoming kind of who she really never wanted to be. And it's kind of a tragic arc. And I do love her. I miss her. I miss her fire. I miss her. You've got to be kidding me. I miss her artsy self. But I do love the character because I think she's really real.
Yeah.
And I think we need her because we've got Abby living her Abby life, right? And here's Jenny, who kind of I sort of thought, oh, Jenny will still have her Jenny self, even no.
Jenny, made a deathbed promise to her mother to kind of, live a more conventional life. And she really gave it her best shot, but it is clearly very, very hard for her, which is why she's hitting the bottle a little bit hard. And why I think she's, possibly, went back, is going back to her art in some ways. I mean, I think each of these characters, especially the women, they're really trying to find their voices, which is,
Right.
something that's very, interesting to me as a writer, of course.
Yep.
I mean, I think I largely found my voice in writing Wild Game. And so I'm interested in how women find their voices. And I think they do generally have a harder time than men doing so. Bless
Right.
you.
That actually gives me a chance to bring in Wild Game for a second, because we are going to get to Abby, I swear. No matter how you feel about Abby, we're still getting
And Steph.
But this idea of finding women's voices too, because your mom was really complicated.
Yes.
And Wild Game, I don't think you left a single thing out. And I imagine that is a really wild ride for you as the writer. And if you did leave things out, I'm going to pretend you didn't just tell me that. Because it's a really, how do I even describe Wild? I mean, I think a lot of us here have read it, but switching back and forth between memoir and fiction, because I assume there will be more fiction. There could be more memoir. We don't know yet, but
we'll take anything.
Yeah, right. We will totally take anything. But balancing fiction and nonfiction, right? And capturing women's voices to match their time, right? Like that letting people be of their moment. It's not easy. And there are a bunch of questions from folks wondering how you do it.
I don't know that I have a very
that one.
just that. Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know Wild Game, in a nutshell, it's the story of when, as a 14-year-old, my mother woke me up one night to let me know that her husband, who was my stepfather, not my father, her husband's best friend had kissed her. And so I sort of went to bed as my mother's daughter, and I woke up as her best friend and became her confidant in this epic love affair that actually ended up resulting in on her being very happily married to my stepfather number 2, the man she'd had an affair with for 20 years. So, but it was really about the toxic nature of keeping a secret like that at such an age, and how embroiled I got in it. But your question is more about writing women's voices at the time.
Right.
And I don't know that I can be a generalist about that, because the voice I was capturing was my mother's voice, and the very specific nature of that. And she was born in 1931. She was someone who lived in a very different era with many fewer opportunities. She would have been a cutthroat businesswoman, and yet that was not a path that she was allowed to take. Her father wouldn't let her into the family business. And so really, it was researching her life, and I feel this way about all my characters, real and made up, is that as you write them and you step into their lives, which I got to know my mother a lot better through writing this memoir. I got to know all the characters in this book, because you really, I think I said this before. I mean, there's a little tip of an iceberg of what's outside the water of characters, but there is just this massive, monstrous iceberg below that you as the writer have to really understand about your characters in order to write those, throwaway reactions and lines, and what their view would be on, I don't know, pasta carbonara. You have to know a lot about them to know which going to want to eat the fat or which one's going to relish the richness, and that's just something that you have to do a lot of work to do. So with my 70-year-olds and my 90-year-olds, depending on the book, I mean, it's specificity, I think, of the character, and more, I mean, this is just a cliche in a saying, but the more specific and unusual and detailed, I mean, the more universal. That's always the way it works, even though it doesn't sound like it's going to work that way, because we are all these quirky little birds, us humans, right? I mean, we can present one way, but we all know our weird habits and our strangenesses, and how we deal with our family that's different than how we, our public personas. And yeah, that's what you want to get when you're writing family dramas.
And speaking of family drama, Shannon, do you think Steph and Abby became friends or sisters?
I think they became sisters because
Okay.
I think they both made, and that's just, Adrienne, jump in. But,
I know, I like hearing what you guys think.
Yeah, I read it as them choosing each other.
Yeah.
And in choosing each other, supporting each other, and very clearly. I mean, I think Steph in her way, Steph was so necessary to break apart the toxicity of what was happening, but also to support the characters that need supporting, and honestly shut out the ones that need to take a look inside and do some work, a la, Ken, where.
Yeah, I didn't really know fully what Steph's role was going to be. I mean, I was very intrigued by the idea of a half sibling coming into a family, in no small part because both my parents had half siblings that they didn't know about. And so kind of both at the receiving end of allowing, someone to enter, but also what's it like to enter a family that's already established and full and complete. And really, I in the writing, I knew I was working towards the party, and that was sort of the, propulsion of the novel, but I didn't actually know as I was writing how it was going to unfold. And so one of the things that Steph really showed me was, we all come from these families, we all know the rules of our families, and Steph, and we follow those rules without really thinking about it that much. And Steph was kind of the one that was like, well, let's say we don't, we don't. And that was eye-opening for Abby. I mean, at first shocking, and then eye-opening. And I do think they became sisters as well. I think it's a real relationship. And, there was, I won't say a lot of temptation, but I feel like several people wanted, a lot of people wanted sort of a happier turnout for Ken and Abby. I mean, not, I'm just thinking early readers who were sort of wondering what I was going to.
Okay.
And I just, I thought about it, but there was no way that was going to be real for these characters. It was not going to be.
I would be bummed. I would have honestly been bummed if that had happened. I think, there's another conversation that we don't often have, which is you can leave.
Yeah.
You can, like, if the thing is not working just because someone tells you it's supposed to work because somehow there's DNA or something, you can also just leave. And I love the idea that you were just very real. I mean, Abby is going to have to build a new thing. And maybe later she gets a thing with Ken, but stuff's going to be weird with her dad for a while too. I mean, also, I'm glad Abby jettisoned the dude who was like, "You're giving me a son." I was just like, "No, I am punting you into the sun right now." And may everyone be happy and may the kid be loved. But like, seriously, giving me a son, please. This is not 1973.
I mean, I feel like some of the language around those little moments in the book, like the moment when Ken refers to the daughter's friend as not realizing who she is as jailbait. I mean, those were actually moments that I witnessed in 2016. These moments that were just like, wait, he didn't say that, and you did, like, things that you actually, I think, have shifted in a way that not no one, people will still say inappropriate things. That's what they do. But there was a lot of it going on then, I felt.
Yeah. Oh, and it was not just you. It was going on.
For sure.
I think so. I know maybe the Ken and Abby not figuring it out for some people may have been disappointing, but I think it's actually also a happier outcome for Ken, even if it's that much harder. Because he actually realized, and he's at least made the acknowledgement to do the work, which, like, that's happy to me.
And I thought the moment in the therapist's office, when even Jenny was like, "Oh, stop this bus. Maybe we should wait." And he, something had snapped in Ken.
I think he has a better shot than he would have otherwise.
Right.
For
I
sure.
think, and if things had gone according to Ken's plan, I don't see that working out well for him. But the same thing, like Abby also sort of just kind of frou-froued through her life and never really had a plan. And she kind of needs a little bit of a plan because now there's a kid.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to frou-frou through your life if there's not a tiny person who's actually dependent on you.
Right.
And I'm curious to see, I feel like Little Monsters is a complete book that, because there are some folks saying, well, do we get a sequel? What happens? And I feel like it's a complete book.
I just today, I cannot tell you how many people at this author luncheon I just were like, well, what happens next? And it is a complete book for me, in as much as I don't have their lives stopped at the end. I keep going in my own mind. But I also am intrigued enough, just by the response, and I certainly would be interested in thinking about them into the future and what might have happened to them and where they might be. I do not have plans to write a sequel, but I do love all of those characters and think there's plenty there to continue to pursue.
There's also an entire next generation. Ken has the daughters who know they're on to dad. Oh, wow. Having been a teenage girl too, we're a handful. But, there's a third generation of gardeners out there, and Steph has, everyone has a kid. So,
and I have two teenagers at home, and they do just keep you on your toes. It's what's going on, and how to talk about it, and how to think about it, and what not to say, and in the best possible way. They also, you need to push back hard at times and everything else, but they, they're very perceptive, and they do not take our BS.
No. Oh no. They are like little
accepted.
human.
Yeah.
Oh no. They absolutely get it. But I do want to ask both of you what the biggest surprise was from Little Monsters. Adrienne, both for you in maybe the writing or reader response, and Shannon, certainly for you as a reader.
The biggest surprise. Honestly, I find, this is going to sound like I'm punting the question, but I find almost every event to be a surprise, because you go out with the book and what you've written, exactly what you've written and what you've thought about and why, and no one has read the same book that you've written, and that's just the truth. Like, no two people read the same book. We all read with our own lens. We all bring new things to it. But so when I get asked questions, I'm just often very surprised by the direction, people will say very firmly, well, this is a book about, friendship, sibling, like whatever it is. But sometimes it's about things that I didn't necessarily feel like, okay, this is the book I'm writing. It's about X or Y. And so that's really an incredible feeling. I love that about writing.
For me, I think it was Steph making the choice to walk away from other people, like that really is an option, because it is not something that you think about, or at least that I think about. And it is, that was such a healthy decision for a character to make. And it's not something, I would have expected, because it's just not something I see demonstrated, but it is a thing that people could do. So that, and then the painting being fixed at the party with the, like, I loved that reveal of it in that way, and how Ken's reaction to it. So that in terms of like a set piece, that I love that. But then from a character decision perspective, I think it was Steph deciding that she didn't need that in her life.
Yeah, honestly, for me, it was the characters. It was that core group, that core five, I think of them: Adam and Ken and Jenny and Abby and Steph, and how attached I was and how willing I was to let them be human on the page and be imperfect and be messy and be very, very real. I liked Steph's relationship with her own parents, and her dad, all of it. there were moments, yes, where Ken drove me around the bend, but at the same time, I never lost sight of this fact that the dude was broken. Abby's broke. Like, you can't get mad at broken people, but you can wonder how it's going to shake out in the end, which absolutely, without a doubt, I hope everyone of the Gardeners gets their piece. I'm not sure Jenny's ever going to get peace. I think she's just really mad and hasn't figured out how to deal with it yet.
Not yet.
Poor Jenny.
Hadn't
But
figured
it
it out
is-
at the end of the book.
The daughters, and there's a lot of love for the daughters in the
Yeah.
Q&A in the chat, that their acknowledgement of they see through things, they have
Mhm.
those quips, they're quick, they're on it, and they're the next generation. So I did love the interactions with both of them. I thought they were a needed addition.
I'm hopeful for Jenny and Abby also for their friendship.
Yes.
And I
Mhm.
am very hopeful that I think Jenny's daughters are going to be what keeps her grounded and what keeps her, sane, for want of a better word, as Ken goes through whatever he's going to go through. I think we're in a really different world. But Adrienne, thank you so much for these characters. Thank you for this book. I'm assuming at some point there will be another something about complicated families, whether it's a novel or a memoir. As Shannon said, we'll take
very
anything.
safe
but-
bet. A very
Okay.
safe bet. Yes.
Right.
All right. And this is where I say thank you. As much as I would like to keep going and just continuing to hang out with the two of you and all of our book club participants, unfortunately, we do have to go back to real life, which is kind of a drag, but such is. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Ann Patchett is here next month for our next BNN book club discussion. And we have a pretty cool surprise coming up for our September pick, which we're announcing at the end of August. So August, just because of Labor Day weekend,
Yes.
we have 2 announcements in August. And also Ann Patchett's book club event is not the Tuesday of Labor Day week. We would not do that to all of you. We're doing it the week after. So check bn.com for details. But Adrienne, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
This has been great. Have
All
a
right.
fantastic day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.